This is Join Us in France, episode 230. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and I'm glad to be with you again after a week off. On today's episode, Elise and I discuss the terrible fire at Notre Dame and explain how it might impact your next trip to France. Show notes and photos for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/230, and I won't be using any of the fire photos because I don't own them. I wasn't there. Join Us in France is brought to you by Patreon supporters and Addicted to France, the small group tour company for people who want to enjoy France to the fullest and with a local, myself. I'll be leading halfway walking tours on Paris May 7th and May 8th. You can still join me. Go to addictedtofrance.com to see what's available, and I would love to meet you in real life if you happen to be in Paris on May 7th and 8th, 2019. Hello, Elise. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Annie.
Well, we're here today to kind of a last minute thing episode that that's jumping the queue. This fire at Notre Dame.
Fire at Notre Dame,
which was just terribly upsetting, and I know it was very upsetting to the listeners out there as well. I got so many messages of expressing sadness and shock and grief,
right,
and the desire to rebuild and the desire to see this get better somehow. You know, I mean, we were all shocked by this, and also lots of people sharing their pictures in front of Notre Dame, saying, you know, I was there and it means something to me,
right,
and that was really touching.
Are you aware of the fact that on I was just reading the results of this, some young American tourist about 45 minutes before the fire began was taking pictures of Notre Dame from the other side of the Esplanade, and she got this great shot of the front of Notre Dame with and halfway between her and the church there was a father with his young daughter, and he was swinging her around. Mm-hmm. And she really loved the photo. And when the fire started, and I don't know if she was still in France or she'd gone back to the States, she posted the photo on Facebook and reached out to people to see if they could find out who that person was, so that person could have this photo. And believe it or not, 4 days later, through the social networks, they actually found the guy.
Oh, how nice.
So he's going to get a copy of this photo of just pre-fire Notre Dame with he and his daughter.
I have, since starting this podcast, I have visited Notre Dame many times.
Many times.
I have taken people to it. And it has become, and I've gone by myself just to get to know it better.
And we've been in there for concerts.
I've been in there for all sorts of things. I don't know, dozens of times. I can't really name them all. Usually when I'm in Paris, I will go into Notre Dame 3 or 4 times in a week because I like it, or at least walk around it or something. Right. So, and I think lots of people, 13 million people visited Notre Dame every year.
Yep.
And so it's a major monument, a major symbol of France.
It's interesting because it's considered to be a jewel in terms of architecture, and of course it's very ancient. It was started in 1163. It celebrated its 850th year a few years ago.
Yeah.
But it's, of course, for almost, I'd say, every French person and other people, but even for every French person, it's a symbol of the history of France.
Right.
It's not just a symbol of the beautiful Gothic architecture.
Right. So we'll get back to the history of Notre Dame briefly later, but I want to say to everybody listening that if you're going to France soon, so within the next few weeks, we're recording this on April 20th, 2019. Yeah. You probably won't be able to approach it.
No.
I'm going in a couple of weeks. I'll see how close I can get. but I think they're going to secure the place
Right.
for obvious reasons, because there are a lot of specialists who need to go see it, who need to go secure. I mean, it could still be a hazard,
Yes,
because fire does a lot of damage. And so imagine we have a terrible storm coming through. There would be more damage even. Winds could damage the structure. All sorts of things could happen.
Last night they said that there were 3 sections of the roof, and one of them being, again, back in the choir, where they don't know if they will hold or not,
right,
at all.
Right.
So
and they are going to have to remove any part that might still fall.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of things that might still fall. Right. So I wouldn't think that we'll be able to approach the cathedral for the next few weeks, at least.
Or at least.
Possibly months. Probably months. But you've also probably heard that President Macron wants this restoration work to move forward
5 years.
Very quickly. By French standards, this is lightning fast.
Yes, well, you know that one of the reasons is because France is hosting the Olympics in 2024.
Correct. And yes,
that's, of course, one of the draws of going to Paris, is having the tourist sites available.
Right. And I think if at least they can get to the point where people can go approach Notre Dame and see it from the outside,
right.
Because, I mean, I might be the only one who feels this way. I don't know how you feel, but I enjoy Notre Dame on the outside even more than on the inside.
Yes, I do.
Because I'm not very religious. I mean, it's a place of awe and beauty inside, but a lot of what was inside is not medieval. It is art and sculptures that are from the 1700s and the 1800s. And so the treasure inside, of course, you have the crown of thorn, right. The treasure. That's where you have older things, much older things. But the art, the paintings, all of that's all much more recent.
Much more recent. Interestingly enough, a few paintings were destroyed, but not that many. The irony of something like that is that many of the paintings, and this is not just true in Notre Dame, but in a lot of these really old medieval churches, many of the paintings have gotten so dark and they're so high up that you can barely see them. So, of course, one of the ironies of all this is that those paintings that were not really damaged will probably be cleaned up and made much more visible.
That's true.
When they're put back inside the
That's
church.
True. That's true.
A lot of 17th century painting, a lot of 18th century painting.
But what a shame that you won't be able to see the doorways of Notre Dame,
of course,
all the art there, all the right. It's very sad.
And the windows were saved, hallelujah, because
most
really,
of them,
the 3 rose windows. One of them, they said there was a little bit of water damage, which apparently is where the seepage can come through in between where the stone framing is and the piece of glass. But just imagine how much worse it would have been if those windows had been destroyed.
Yes,
I mean, they are part of the most monumental part.
Some of them are damaged because they're held together by lead.
Yeah.
And lead melts at a relatively low temperature. And of course, it was an inferno.
That's what the spire was. It was a lot of lead.
Right. Yeah, the spire
The spire was wood, lead, and copper. Mm-hmm. Here you go, bonfire.
Yeah. So the part of the cathedral that burned, we call la forêt, the forest.
The forest.
Because it was the original frame of the roof structure, from the 13th century.
Yep.
So this was extremely old wood, very old, very, very dry. And there were 200,000 tons of wood up there.
Every beam was a tree.
Yes. So that's a lot of wood. And my initial reaction, I was in front of the computer when the fire, when they first started announcing. So I saw images right away. And my gut reaction is, bring in the helicopters with water. Because, because I lived in Utah for a long time. And in Utah... Well, but at least I wasn't suggesting it. I mean, I only Yeah, I don't have that many followers. It doesn't. If I say something stupid, it doesn't matter quite as much. But living in Utah, you see forest fires and the helicopters, and so that was my gut reaction. And of course, I've since learned that would have been a terrible, terrible thing to do.
It would have been terrible.
Right. Actually, other cathedral fires, like the Cathedral of Nantes. So that was like 1972 or something like that. They were very careful to spray as little water as they could. So at Notre Dame, that's not the what they chose to do. They chose to just douse it.
But this is the thing, and this is one of those things that always, I find so amazing. Notre Dame, this is the first fire in over 850 years.
It's amazing.
This is amazing. And I read so many articles this week where they were saying it is absolutely astonishing that it has been that long and there has not been a fire before in Notre Dame. And that wood is the original wood. There are very few of the major medieval cathedrals that can still claim that,
Yeah.
So it's like, it didn't happen in the 1700s. It didn't happen in the 1800s. It didn't happen in the 1900s.
Or the World Wars.
Right. And it was not destroyed. Like the cathedral in Reims was twice destroyed in the bombings,
Right. So the Cathedral of Reims, they decided to rebuild the roof with reinforced concrete.
Yep.
And they installed firewalls inside. And they had discussed possibly installing firewalls at Notre Dame at some point, but it had been decided that nothing electrical would go anywhere near those beams.
Is that right? I didn't know that. Yeah.
So they had fire alarms, but they were the ones that run on batteries.
Right.
That there was just batteries in there, and that's it. There was no lighting in there. It was just no electricity because they knew.
Well, they knew it was very dry. And of course, the irony also is that they were in the process of taking care of some renovation work because apparently there some of the experts were complaining that there should have been more projects for renovation done because it was in very bad shape. And that
the spire especially.
The spire, lots of things inside the roof. And so they were being very careful. And unfortunately, we still don't know how the fire began.
No.
But just for all of you out there listening, this was not a plot. This was not a crazy plot to make sure blah, 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 to make sure that Macron had problems or didn't have problems. This was an accident.
Yeah.
It was an unfortunate electrical accident in a place where there's a lot of dust.
Probably electrical, maybe because they were finishing up putting together the scaffolding. Yep. And some of these fires, it doesn't take much, if you have amber enough amber falls on somewhere where it's very dry and tinder.
A piece of light comes through.
And also it could have, because there's a lot of air. The inside is huge. So lots of fresh air and, tinder, it might have started the day before and just slowly. We don't know. The cause of it. We might find out at some point. We might not. So I had several people try to post to the group conspiracy theories about, but why is it that there's been 5 church fires in France and blah, blah, last month or whatever it was. I didn't want to verify all of this. There are church fires. France is full of churches.
And of old churches.
And some of them burn.
And lots of carpentry.
If you go through the French countryside, as we do because we live here, you will see burned churches. Yep. Everywhere you go. So this is not surprising. We know it happens, and it's terrible that it happened at Notre Dame, but it's unfortunately a common thing, and they knew it was a risk. Yeah, and they could have installed, I guess, sprinklers and not, but just the fact to go in and install all those things.
It's enormous work.
but it's not the work. It's that it could have started a fire.
Yeah,
anything you do, you could start a fire.
Just the size of everything, it's like they're talking about the scaffolding they're going to have to put up on the outside, and there's this gaping hole in the choir when you look up.
Yeah.
And there's this huge, enormous hole. The debris that's still on the inside of the church is enormous.
Yeah,
it's actually a miracle that none of the fire people and the rescuers were really seriously hurt.
Yeah, nobody. I think there was one
injury
from a firefighter was injured,
right, but no deaths, no major injuries.
No, it's a miracle.
It's a miracle.
In this terrible event, that was very, very lucky.
400 firefighters, professional firefighters, because not everywhere in France are they professional. Yeah. Other rescuers, they brought out the emergency squads of all kinds.
Yeah.
The amazing thing is, while there were still people working to get to tamper the flames, they'd started a human chain, to get pieces out of the church.
Right, art.
To get artwork.
The ones that they could manage with a few people. There were
the crown of thorns.
Right. That and the vestment from Louis XI. Saint Louis. Let's call him Louis now.
Saint Louis. There we go. Have to worry about the number.
I'm confused about the numbers.
I mean, that was immediately, they wrapped these things up and they just started this human chain to get everything that was mobile, that was liftable, out as quickly as they could. So they did save most of those things.
Yeah.
They've been, imagine now they're being trucked. They were trucked immediately to the Louvre, first to City Hall and then to the Louvre.
Yeah.
But you're not going to get to see them at the Louvre. I don't think so.
No.
I think they'll be put in careful vaulting.
Yeah. Well, they have to make sure that they're okay first.
That they're okay.
Yeah, because water damage, they probably got wet. What I'm worried about is the organ.
The organ.
The organ, I don't think suffered any extensive fire damage.
Some of the pipes got wet.
I'm sure they did, and organs are very precious instruments. The one at Notre Dame was particularly beautiful.
And very old.
Yes, it was 1700s, I think.
It was earlier, 1600s, I think. I think it was one of the earliest major organs that's still in existence.
Right, and it probably had been restored and all of that. But just a beautiful instrument with a great sound.
I listened to France Musique, which is one of the classical music stations, and the morning after the fire, they interviewed one of the three organists. He was crying.
I bet.
But
that's his baby.
But he was saying, that they had just gotten news that it wouldn't. They thought it was worse. The news would be worse than it was in terms of the organ. They thought it was completely destroyed. So he said that was already better news than they expected.
Yeah,
because that would have been major.
Yeah. No, this organ, I'm so glad it appears to have come through most of it anyway. We'll see if it's playable. They might have to change the console. They might have to do a lot of work, but that sound was so specific to Notre Dame of the organ, because I like to go into churches. I hear church organs all the time.
You like that a lot.
Yes, and this one had a very specific ring to it. Now, people will also talk about the bells.
Yes, I was going to say the
bells, the bourdon, but I think they're fine.
They're fine, and I was like, my reaction was, oh my God, the bells, because I remember it was just a few years ago that they had reproduced the major bourdon, and they made this huge ceremony to bring it in through Paris to install it in the church.
But the bourdon doesn't ring that often, so you don't get to hear it that much.
No, but still, I thought, oh, no, not the bells, but they're okay.
I'll play the organ and the bells as intro music and outro music for this episode, because I love them. And when I heard a piece of Bach just earlier today played on that organ. It's so emotional. But such is life. Bad things happen. They happen to people. People find out they have cancer. People find out terrible things that happen to them. And I think it's pretty clear that Paris and France and the world is resilient enough to put this back together again. It might take a few years. I really hope they give us access to the outside reasonably soon, which to me would mean a few months. You know, it'd be nice.
That might be a bit optimistic, but
yeah.
I mean, certainly you can still see it from the other side of the Esplanade or across the river. But
I don't think you.
You think the other side of the Esplanade is completely closed off?
Because they only let people who work come in.
Okay, but you can still be on the other side of the river and see it.
Yeah, bring binoculars.
Well, I mean, you're not going to get inside it, that's for sure, and that won't be for a long time.
So the Metro Cité is closed. They had closed also Châtelet and one more. Maybe Saint-Michel.
Maybe Saint-Michel.
And they do that not because the metro stations are damaged, but because they know throngs of visitors come out of these metro stations to go see Notre Dame. And that's their purpose, is to keep visitors away from it, because it's somewhat dangerous at this point. And they really want to leave it completely clear for people who have business.
They need
there.
access to
they need access.
Yeah.
So for now, don't even think about it. So what else can you if you're not going to be able to see Notre Dame, what else might you see instead? I think the church that's the closest in style and age is Saint-Denis. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, Saint-Denis is in the middle of a
not very
rough neighborhood. So
but it's very beautifully.
So I think if you are from a major city anywhere in the world, you have seen rough neighborhoods, because every city has them. So you wouldn't be so startled by Saint-Denis. But if you are from a tiny town somewhere in rural America, you might be freaked out. So in that case, I would recommend that you go using a taxi or Uber.
And go to the main entrance of the
just ask them,
Cathedral.
drop me off at the door, because there is a metro station, but it is a good kilometer away.
Is it that far?
I think it is.
I thought there were 2 exits, and you have to just be careful about which exit you take.
Well, I took the wrong one once and found myself in a neighborhood that made me nervous. Yeah. So follow if you do this, do it in broad daylight.
Right.
And follow the tourists.
Right.
Follow the signs that show you where the basilica is, because you don't want to take a wrong turn in that neighborhood. Not that it's that dangerous.
It's just a little.
It's just it's just unsettling when you're not used to it.
Now there's another church. It's certainly not nearly as beautiful, and it's a little bit more recent, and that's Saint Eustache. And Saint Eustache, which is really right next to the Halles, right? 1300s.
It's funky in there.
Well, it's very beautiful from the outside, because it's got all of the gorgeous flying buttresses that of course were first put on Notre Dame, and the gargoyles and everything else. But it's true that when you think about it, now I'm just thinking as you're talking about this, there are other churches. There's Saint-Sulpice, there's Saint-Germain. One is more Baroque, one is more ancient. But there is no other major church in Paris that has the allure, not just the history, but the allure of Notre Dame. You have to really go out of Paris to get to Chartres or
Saint-Denis or Saint-Denis.
Or Rouen.
Yeah. Saint-Denis is pretty close, but inside it's the same sort of feeling as what you get inside of Notre Dame. The windows are even more spectacular at Saint-Denis, the stained glass windows. But it's that sort, because Sully, who was the instigator of Notre Dame, and l'Abbé Suger were both contemporaries.
Yes, they were. And Suger was, of course, at Saint-Denis.
Right. So Suger developed Saint-Denis. Sully developed Notre Dame. They were both very taken with this idea of light as the representation of the Spirit of God.
Light and color as they represent it.
It's just that Notre Dame had a little extra. Notre Dame was, of course, it's dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And forgive me for a tiny bit of theology here, but the whole idea of Notre Dame is that if you bring your worries to the Holy Mother, she will intercede for you to be in the good graces of God the Father. That's huge, Catholic theology, and it's not one that most other Christians believe in. But this was the whole idea, and so the cathedral was built with this lots of statues of Mary. Yep. And women and Saint Genevieve, right. And others, and you just it was an invitation for people to bring their sin to Mother Mary so that she would intercede on their behalf.
It was because there was at some point around the year 1000, I don't have an exact date, there was a change in the theology of the Catholic Church, and it became what they call a Marial, named after Mary, theology, where she became as important
because she was more approachable.
Right. And so she was the mother figure, and she became, and therefore all these churches were built in dedication to her.
And in France, this was a huge deal. Yeah. It didn't happen so much in other Catholic countries. I mean, Germany has plenty of Catholics. Spain has plenty of Catholics, Italy. But they didn't go in that direction quite as strongly as France did. So that's why it's probably the reaction of Catholics in France is... we've lost this intercession kind of place.
I guess that's true for practicing Catholics, but I think for others, it's really that more. Somebody said on television the other night, the Eiffel Tower is the symbol of Paris. Notre Dame was a symbol of France. And it was one of the reasons why the German general refused to have it blown up when they were leaving Paris. It was simply something that he could not bring he could not bring himself to do.
Right. That when they had bombed others.
They had bombed others, and they had already put dynamite in the church. They'd put dynamite around the Eiffel Tower. But part of the beauty of the city is that, and of course, it's on this island in the middle of the Seine,
right?
And it's fabulous because that's one of the things I love the most about taking the boat ride. Is you go around it, and you're looking up at it. It's just so gorgeous. I think
actually taking the boat ride might be a good way to get as close as you're going to get.
Yeah.
Because I don't think they might divert the boats for a little bit, but either way they go, you're not that far from it.
You're not that far away.
Right. Well, although if they go on the side of...
I can't imagine them stopping the boats. I mean, because they do go past it. I mean, unless they just stop in front of Ile de la Cité. But I don't know. I mean, we should check that out.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. So the spire... which is the first thing that, of course, went. All these, they're replaying this incredible fire. And I can't imagine what it must have been like to be there watching this thing fall in. It is akin, in a sense, to the symbolism of course, the Twin Towers without the many deaths and injuries associated with it.
Thankfully,
and people were standing there agape, and many people, I think, were even screaming. And then, of course, the flames started everywhere. So... among the things,
because the spire is what cut through the roof.
The roof.
I mean the la voûte. I don't know how to say that in English.
The vaulting.
The vaulting. Yeah, the vaulting, that's when the fire hit.
It went right in.
Yeah.
So now there's going to be, besides the whole question of donations and money, there is now officially a competition. For a design for this new spire. Mm-hmm. And again, I love it because it brings up so many divergent points of view about things like this.
I think we should rebuild it exactly like it was.
Well, so, there are lots of people who think that. There are lots of people who think it should be kind of like it was, but not quite.
The structure. The people in the 1200s brought to Notre Dame the best know-how that they had.
Right.
And I think we should do the same today. So if the best know-how that we have today is some high-tech material to support the roof, go for it.
So it wouldn't have to be the same material.
No, it wouldn't have to be the same material. Just I love that spire. Although earlier when you mentioned it, I was like, maybe if they put the statues down below where we could see them.
Right on the ground.
That would be nice too.
That would be nice too. But I loved the way they climbed. I loved the way they just seemed to be climbing up to the top. You could do a monument.
You could do a monument and have them climb somewhere we could see them.
So, there are people who are saying, well, look, they made this incredible pyramid. And at first there was a lot of resistance to that because it was not the same. It was very contemporary in relation to the rest of the buildings of the Louvre.
You mean the Louvre? Yeah.
The Louvre.
Yeah.
So, there are lots of people voicing different opinions about should it be a spire that's more or less identical, most likely will not be the same materials because they're not going to have to. They have to think about future no fire, and
it has
just
to
like what they did in
stand for another 850 years.
It has to stand. So the question is it materials that are disguised as something ancient or not? Is it exactly the same form or not? And so far, if I've been reading all these articles and all these newspapers online and watching these things on television. You get really everything from it has to be exactly the same. It has to be wood and this and that. And then you get things like, oh, let's make it look like a flying something or other. You really get every kind of possible suggestion. So it will be interesting. First of all, I do not know who is going to decide. There's going to be some kind of committee.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who the people will be on the committee. And it will be interesting to see if there's a lot of pressure to really make it look exactly the same, even if they could disguise newer materials,
right. Given that the schedule is very tight,
right.
I don't think they're going to give everybody 2 years to just think about it, so it's going to have to go faster than that. And they have excellent 3D modeling of what the roof looked like because of two things. The company that was putting up the scaffolding, before they started, they did, with drones, they did 3D modeling of the roof, exactly how it was. And also the company that did Assassin's Creed, it's a video game. It's a game. They had done a 3D modeling of Notre Dame. And this one, they can look at those. They know exactly what it looks like. And I think, I don't know what they're going to do, and I don't have any dog in this fight.
Right.
To me, so long as it looked glorious, I want it to be pleasant. I want it to be a place where you just go and you go, wow, this place is amazing.
I think the real question about something like that is how different or modern do you want to make it? When Viollet-le-Duc started doing renovations in the 19th century, he added things that were not originally there, but he added them more or less in a style that was conform with basically Gothic style in terms of, except that he used some materials. All of those figures in copper that were placed on the roof. So I think that becomes the real issue. Definitely the spire will be rebuilt, but will it be rebuilt in a way that it immediately conflicts in some way with what's already there, or will they conform? My guess is they will try to conform. They will try to make it look, at least on the outside, almost like the one that just burned down.
Yeah.
Because I think too many people would be very upset about it not looking like that,
Yeah.
Even if they use carbon composite forms or something like
whatever
that, to
the best
put
material.
on the inside.
There's lots of people who are very smart about these
things. But they're talking about now is, of course, also with the vaulting inside, to not put wood back inside, just like they did in Reims.
Right.
Because it's not the part that's seen except by the specialists.
Right.
And it is safer.
Anything above the vault, you won't see it.
It's safer.
Because when people went up the tower, they got a peek at one point at the forest.
Right.
But nobody walked there unless it was a TV crew or something.
Or the people who worked there,
Yeah. So it wasn't accessible to people also because they didn't want to chance of a fire.
And I have no idea, honestly, if reinforced concrete is heavier or not as heavy as wood.
Yeah, I don't know.
I have no idea. It's just that obviously from this point on, they're going to try and make it things that do not go up in flame very easily.
Quite as easily, yes.
Quite so easily.
Yes.
I don't know what the other options are. It won't be plastic, whatever it is,
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's going to take a while. the cleaning up first will take a while. The checking of everything to see what really is still wobbly and not quite safe will take a while.
Yeah.
And so there we are.
I heard from an architect that one of the things he's worried about is that they have replaced some stones over the years.
Yeah.
And that stone is not always exactly from the same place.
Uh-huh.
And the old stone doesn't, as a material, isn't the same rigidity and solidity as newer stone. And so they're worried that in places where there's a lot of new stone, well, new relatively, that things might crumble. You know, so
with that the new stone is not as sturdy as the old.
No, it's just different. It's just
different density.
The difference of density.
Different density.
The other thing that I heard that I thought was fascinating is that one of the reasons why the walls didn't fall down is that it took 200 years to build Notre Dame, and they had to build things that were standalone.
Yeah.
Nowadays, when you build a magnificent structure like this, you tie it all up.
Right.
The roof is put, everything because the forces are balanced with the whole structure.
Right.
Notre Dame, they didn't have this. They built it bit by bit. So different, the tower had to stand on its own. The walls had to stand on their own. They even found now, because they're flying a lot of drones over it.
Right.
They're finding that there were water evacuation systems that were used for temporary roofing when they built the original roof that we never knew were there.
Right.
So, they're going to use all of these ancient building techniques because they had the right idea.
They had the right idea.
You do need to evacuate the water.
That's right.
It's going to rain. I mean... It's Paris, it's going to rain.
Oh, well, and that's how they came up with the idea of gargoyles,
Right. So the gargoyles, the chimera, we don't know how much damage.
No.
I am so glad I took my big zoom lens to Notre Dame and took as many shots as I wanted to of these beautiful little pieces of architecture.
Did you know that the chimera were actually the work of Viollet le Duc?
Yeah, they were added. I knew they were not originally.
Yeah. I mean, I knew that, he made the definitive 2-volume work on Gothic architecture, but he had this idea that he could improve Gothic architecture, and it's very interesting, So for
he also
us,
made the windows taller.
He made the windows taller. I mean, he did things that now that's what makes it so interesting. It's like people in the 20th century, they go, "Oh yeah, cool, that's the ancient church." So it's like the generation that's alive when they rebuild the church is going to be, I don't like it. It's not exactly the same. But future generations, they're not going to know any different.
That's true.
They're just not.
That's true.
And when you look at these, when you think about it, most of the cathedrals, most of them took at least 150 years to build, and they changed style along the way. So, that except of course when it's a radically different kind of thing. But give another generation and they'll go, wow, look at this church.
And if you people who had a chance to look at it before now, the 3 doorways of Notre Dame are of different times, and you can tell when you look at them. The doorway of Saint Anne, so the one all the way to the right when you're facing the cathedral, is much older than the other 2. And you can tell the statues are of a different style,
and
they're
not
much
as
smaller.
And they're eaten away a little bit,
Yeah. So it's. I think change is not a big deal. Let's talk a tiny bit about the controversy over the money.
Okay, and then just mention a couple of the people that went there, whose lives are associated with it, and really just. Before we even do, I don't know where he is, I don't know, whatever, but Victor Hugo, thank you very much, because if it hadn't been for you and writing that book in 1831, which you wrote so that it could be saved, Notre Dame wouldn't be there at all.
At all, because when Victor Hugo wrote his novel, kids were actually playing ball up against the walls of
Yeah.
Notre Dame. They were shooting soccer balls at it. Nobody really cared about
It
the
was in
cathedral.
terrible repair.
It was in terrible repair. The revolution, various wars, anything of any value had been taken out.
Yep.
People would break off little statues, either to throw them in the river or to take them home.
Take 'em home.
Whatever, So the cathedral before Notre Dame de Paris, so The Hunchback of Notre Dame in English, the novel was not highly considered.
No,
so
lots of people wanted to destroy it.
yes, so it's come a long way,
Yeah.
both in culturally but of course Victor Hugo had. So I think it's chapter 4 in the book. That's a long chapter where. This book is brilliant because the plot moves in some chapters, but not in all of them. Some of them he takes a rest from telling you the story, and he will just pontificate.
Uh-huh.
and his pontification about the cathedral.
Yeah.
Is very interesting. He wanted it to be kept the same.
same.
Of course, that was probably a bad idea, but he didn't have to be brilliant about everything.
No, but it really is not only, but very much his work that helped convince people to save the cathedral.
to pay attention.
To pay attention, and then, of course, eventually to renovate it, So I'm sure that he's saying, okay, well, there's a fire, but look, it's still there.
Yes,
It's still
yes.
there. No, so the money.
Yeah.
So France is kind of special when it comes to dealing with public and private money.
Especially public money going to churches.
Well, this is, and there's some of the laws of the fiscality in France that I just have a hard time kind of understanding anyway. But so right now, what has happened is that so far, major corporations, starting with the two of the three most important fortunes in France, that is the Arnault and the Pinault, the people who own Vuitton, L'Oréal, all of these, the three biggest billionaires in France.
Yeah.
First, it was the Pinault family that pledged 100 million. Then to up it, that was the Arnault family. Then the Pinault family said, okay, 200 million. And then the Bettencourt, the L'Oréal family, did the same. Mm-hmm. So already we are starting with 500 million
from the get-go.
From the get-go. And then other corporations, a little bit less generous, but contributed major things like Total, which is a huge petroleum company, and all of this. And then, of course, we even have some money coming in from major corporations in the States and a few other places. Aside from private donations, right now, what has been pledged is approximately 850 million euros.
Right, we're close to $1 billion already.
Which is already, and the estimates are, of course, that it will cost certainly well over $1 billion to do the work. But this is a good chunk of money. So the problem is that we have a lot of social activity, social issues floating around for the last 6 months in France that have to do with fiscality, that has to do with people with very small incomes being too taxed, and the fact that Macron, who's president of France, has eliminated the tax on the super rich.
Right.
And so...
because in his estimation, it was doing more harm than good.
Right. Well, his idea was, and of course it has not been proven to be correct so far, is that people would leave the country and go to fiscal places that were more favorable, like Holland and Ireland.
Some did.
And some did, but most of them didn't. So a lot of people are very thankful that these corporations immediately reacted by donating money. And then a lot of other people have made a lot of noise about how this is money that should be better used to take care of people. And really, who gives a damn about this building? Really, I mean, it kind of goes from one extreme to the other. There's also a lot of people in the middle who say, okay, it's wonderful that all of these corporations are giving money, but at the same time, let's not let this become a cover-up to forget that there really are some serious social problems going on in France right now. Mm-hmm. So Arnault, who was the first one to give the money, he reacted to this by going back to the press 2 or 3 days later, it really happened rather quickly, and saying, I pledge that this 100 million euros will not go towards my defiscalization, which means he will pay taxes on it.
Right. So if you make a donation like this, normally you get to write that off.
Write it off, right?
To your taxes. Right. And because people were like, oh, they're just doing it to get the tax write-off. They don't mean it. They're hypocrites and blah, blah, blah. So they said, okay, I won't even get the tax write-off.
Which Pinot, of course, at first refused to do, who had pledged 200 million.
He's entitled to the tax write-off.
But wait a second, Annie, because the truth is, and that's why I prefer Arnaud to Pinot at this point, aside from the fact that he's married to Salma Hayek, but that's something else, is that he was right, because he said that if that's the case and they can do it as a write-off, then a lot of the actual money will not come from them. It will come from taxpayers. And he has enough money that he said, for once, that's not going to happen. So,
well, that's true, because if you get the write-off, then taxpayers
have to pay.
Have to pay more in taxes, I guess. It's not direct, but yeah.
So of course, and tonight, Saturday night, there is a huge, the equivalent of like a marathon on television. There's a huge concert that's going to be shown on television live starting at 9 o'clock at night, where all the famous people that you can imagine, singers and TV personalities and actors and everybody are going to come out and do something. And the spiel is to get individuals to donate.
Like a telethon or something.
Yeah, like a telethon, right? Yeah. Which will probably bring in a few million, a bunch of millions, mean, a few million anyway. Because they're trying to make this a kind of collective thing, does the government actually have $1 billion or $2 billion to give without these donations? I have no idea.
I doubt it.
I doubt it. We're not. It's kind of stringent at this point, but it's very strange at the same time, very interesting, because in the States, I don't think that there was any controversy about where was the money going to come from to rebuild the Twin Towers.
No.
And I don't honestly know where the money did come from.
Nobody cares in America. They French people are they're petty. When it comes to money, they are petty. So they envy people who have more.
Yeah.
And when the people who have more donate, they go, oh, you're only doing it for tax write-offs.
Right.
And they envy them no matter what they do. Now, I'm not a wealthy person. I was not raised wealthy. But this attitude infuriates me. I think if Pinot and Arnaud made a lot of money, good for them. They earned it. As far as I know, they didn't rape any children to get there. So, get off their backs kind of thing. That's my attitude. And the whole business of, but wouldn't the money be better spent for that instead? Well, okay, so we've heard this argument before. Don't spend money on NASA. Spend it on autism instead. You can't spend money on deaf people because there are blind people. Bug off. You know what? It's my business who I donate to.
But part of that is because there is much less separation between public and private in France than there is in the United States. And the truth is that for the last 6 months, it's come to a crisis, because it certainly existed before. There is a real issue with minimum wage, with all kinds of things. And the government has been running around crying and saying, well, we don't have the money.
But all the countries in the world have the same problem. The problem is globalization. They thought globalization was going to make everybody richer, and it did not. It's making some people immensely rich, wealthier, and the rest of us not so much. So that's a global problem. It's the same problem in America. It's the same problem all over Europe. We have people who don't have, who are not in a position to take advantage of globalization, and others who are. And so but I don't think Macron can fix it by himself. I don't think President Trump can fix it by himself. Nobody can, it's just a global problem. And all over the world, we're seeing wealthy people get wealthier and poorer people get poorer.
That's true. But there's another issue, and it's one that I think is kind of interesting because it's debatable, and that is whether a specific symbol, an object. In this case, Notre Dame is an object in that sense, okay? It's a structure. It's a structure. How important for humanity, for a particular culture, for a particular country, is it to keep its symbols? And I think that is where it's a really interesting argument in favor of the money going to the renovation of the church, because look at the fuss that has been made because of all the destruction of all of the monuments in Afghanistan and in other places like that, in Iraq and Syria, because of these major wars, because people were blowing these things up intentionally. And yet they are part of the history of humanity. And so there's a value in having them for people to be able to look at, to know about.
Yeah.
And I think that is where the people who are saying this money that should be used to help people have a better wage, I think that is where they're off, you see.
Yeah.
Because I think it's the idea is that on some level, I think it's the responsibility of the government to kind of find a way of making both happen.
Exactly. You do both.
Both.
You help the blind people and the deaf people.
Right.
Now, some people will choose to help the blind and some people will choose to help the deaf.
Right.
But that's fine, so long as there are people who do both. Now, just because I haven't donated yet, but just because I probably will, but just because I donate to that doesn't mean I'm going to not give a few euros to somebody on the street. I'm not going to give more or less. We all have our habits.
Right.
And we are all touched by different things. And we can't, if Notre Dame doesn't get rebuilt, it will not solve poverty in France.
No, and it
will
won't.
not.
And it's not, I think, up to the individual like you or I to actually be the person to choose to find the solution to that either. You know?
Right.
But I think the other thing is that I know some people who really, for political reasons, think that major monuments, whether they're religious or whether they're things like Versailles, which
we shouldn't spend money on them.
that they shouldn't even exist anymore.
The problem is that these monuments are owned by the French. In my village, it's the mayor. It's the people of the village that own the church.
Right.
It's not the priest. It's not the Catholic Church. It's the community of taxpayers in this village.
And isn't that true for castles as well? Unless they're privately owned?
Yes, probably. I haven't looked into that, but I've looked into churches, and any churches that were built before 1904 belong to the city where they are. And Notre Dame is, I haven't checked, but I'm pretty sure it belongs to the city.
To Paris.
It belongs to the city of Paris. Mm-hmm. So they are responsible for the upkeep of the walls, and the priests are responsible for running the religious stuff inside. The state, the city of Paris, does not pay the priests. Does not, the priests need to get their money some other way. But the church, if the church needs a new roof, it's the village that pays for it, or it's the city that pays for it. In this case, because it's such a monumental undertaking and because it's so much in the eyes of the world, they are taking advantage of that and raising a lot of funds.
Right. Because
if it was up to the city of Paris, it might take 500 years to rebuild this, because they just don't have the money. They would have to raise the taxes to such extent that it wouldn't get done. So we're very lucky that people care so much about Notre Dame. Now, should they also care about the other problems in the world? Sure, they should. But you know what? Just because they care about Notre Dame doesn't mean that they don't care about the others, and vice versa.
Well, I really think that there are two really distinct issues. And, it's not the big major corporate billionaires that are going to be helping to solve the problems of minimum wage in France. I think it's just a separate issue. And I think that the whole question of what we like to call in France patrimoine and history, we're talking about symbols of civilization. Mm-hmm. And I think that they have a very important place in the world.
And honestly, other people I see, all my acquaintances and family and friends on Facebook who say, oh, who cares about Notre Dame? Right. They've never set foot in there.
Right.
We live in Toulouse, and I know a lot of people who have never been to Paris just to go see the monuments. They might have gone to Paris because they have family there. They never go to see any of the monuments. They never go to see the museums. their life is somewhere else.
Well, you wonder, then I would assume that that's the same people that would not go into for instance, Saint-Sernin here, which is
Probably
the most
not.
beautiful church and monument
Probably
structure.
not. But they might have occasion to go in there if there's a wedding
Right.
or a christening or a
Right.
funeral. So they might step in there for that.
But they're not interested in the history of those places.
No, they're not. They're not. And there's lots of French people who don't care, and that's fine. There's lots of Americans who don't care about history and all of it, and that's fine. Not everybody has to care about the same things.
But I mean, it's just, it's the same as going to a major monument that you associate with any culture or country. I mean, there are things that you try to save if you can.
Yeah.
That's just all, as humans, we build, I mean, we build more than just little beehives, and things like that. And it is part of our collective idea of what our history is.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, temples, Buddhist temples and the Taj Mahal and whatever, and all of the major monuments that you have all over the world that look at how we go looking for the last stones and bricks of some ruin, like at Machu Picchu,
Yes.
so that we can
wanna
try to
see it.
imagine what it was
Right,
like in
we
the
wanna
past.
see it.
So, I think that it has a real function in our lives to make sure that these things stay.
I agree.
Stay.
And I think Notre Dame will be back. Hopefully, 5 years is not too ambitious. I don't know. It would be
wonder.
really surprising to me because French people are super slow, and construction in France always takes a lot longer than they say it will.
I would doubt it.
Yeah.
I really doubt it.
Yeah, if I was a betting woman, I would say no. But but the Olympics is a big thing.
But so look at all the other things you can go to see in Paris and come for the Olympics anyway. So, I mean...
Sure, but now that they've heard all this about Notre Dame, the
so
people
they'll
who
come and
haven't...
see it on the outside.
Right. So the people who haven't seen it yet are like dying to see it now.
Right.
Like they'll want to see how it's progressing, what what they choose to do, all of the things we discussed today.
Yeah.
So it's human nature, we talk about it, so more people are interested in it.
So in 5 years, I think they'll be able to at least do a walk around,
Oh, much less than that for
So,
sure.
I mean, so that's good enough for a starter, you know?
And honestly, I would recommend if you want to see that sort of church, go to Saint Denis, but just with the caveat that it's in a rough neighborhood.
Yeah.
You just need to know that. And the other churches that I love in Paris are the one right next to the Pantheon.
Sainte-Chapelle.
La Sainte-Chapelle, of course, is very small, but it's very beautiful.
You like Saint-Geneviève.
Saint-Geneviève. C'est Saint-Bidule de machin truc.
Saint-Étienne.
Saint-Étienne-du-Mont. Saint-Étienne-du-Mont.
Ouais.
It's a completely different style than Notre Dame.
Right.
It's not from the same era. It's not the same size.
And then there's Saint-Sulpice, which is
Saint-Sulpice is very
Baroque.
nice. Saint-Sulpice,
And I like Saint-Germain, so,
Yeah, Saint-Germain is also nice. It's small, but it's nice. Of course, you have the Madeleine, but that's like a weird Greek temple.
Yeah, it's a Greek temple.
It's very bizarre.
It's a Greek temple, and then, of course, you have Sacré-Cœur, which is a end of 19th century, strange church, but, whatever.
kind of a bit of a feel of. But Sacré-Cœur, I'm telling you, I'm seeing a lot of people recommending go to Sacré-Cœur instead. Fine, but Sacré-Cœur, these people are seriously religious. They will despise the increase in tourism.
They're going to have to learn to control it. They're going to have to do a number control,
Because the people who run that church, they are very religious, and they are not the type of people who are okay with tourists snapping photos.
Well, there are already enough,
And there's already lots of them, and it's only going to be more of them. But of course, it's a completely different church. You don't get the same feeling going into the Sacré-Cœur as you do going to Notre Dame at all. So I don't know if people care about that, but I care about that. I want something kind of the same, from the same era, from the same time frame, all of that.
So just to mention a couple of people from the past, because most of them I knew, but actually a couple of them. So, of course... The Church of Notre Dame is associated with Saint Louis, and of course the Crown of Thorns. It's also where Joan of Arc was rehabilitated. Not where she wasn't burned there, obviously.
No.
But this is where she was really made the savior of France.
Yeah.
This is where Napoleon had himself crowned.
Of course.
After all, crown yourself. That's the best way of doing it anyway,
yourself, yes.
Crown yourself, Before him, we have Henry IV, who was not allowed inside when he married the queen. Well, she was not the queen, but when he married...
I don't know what her name was.
Here we go. I'm having one of those moments, Margaret de Valois.
Margaret de Valois, okay.
To become king... and the reason he was not allowed in, they actually had to have a proxy stand in for him inside, was because he was Protestant. And at that time, they would not even allow him inside the church.
Which was a bum move.
Which, of course, eventually he corrected by converting so that he could officially take over all the titles and power and whatsoever. Anyway, but... imagine him standing outside the door while he was in proxy married to Marguerite de Valois.
Wow, that is bizarre.
It is bizarre. It actually is bizarre. And then, of course, we have our dear Victor Hugo and Charles de Gaulle. Charles de Gaulle, who wanted, when they liberated Paris and when he came through, had his first major speech, because there was a man who really understood the idea of a symbol. And Notre Dame represented the spirit of France.
Right. And I can't remember where I heard, maybe it was on another podcast called Satellite Sisters. It's a lovely podcast. They were saying that they knew somebody who was at Notre Dame when JFK was assassinated. And that he saw de Gaulle and his whole cabinet walk in to pray for JFK.
Wow.
In Notre Dame. So I think de Gaulle, he did that. He's the kind of...
it's possible. He certainly was, he was practicing Catholic, so I would imagine. And also he was very much into symbol, the places and events and things like that. That would be symbolic.
On that one, I agree with him. It's so important. I'm not even a believer. I just think it's... the things we do, the ceremonial things we do in life matter. And, when I was on the Parvis of Notre Dame a few years back, and all of these little kids were doing their first communion, and they were all wearing the white and whatever, I thought it was super touching. And I saw it again in Saint-Sulpice, and it was very interesting because I was leading a tour, and I was with a group of visitors, and one of them was creeped out by that.
Oh, that's very strange.
Right.
Because I did that. You sure it wasn't the time we did it together in Paris? Because I remember seeing. Because then it was.
I would have liked to have you, but I didn't.
But then it must have been
a different time that you
did it. Yeah. So I wonder.
It happens every year.
It was probably that time of the year because the same thing happened. That I had a group doing communion, and they were all in white, and I had a couple of people who were kind of like, "What's that?"
Yeah.
It was kind of interesting.
And you can tell the ones that are kind of raised a little bit more traditional Catholic because they don't even touch the host.
Right.
They kneel and the priest puts the host in their mouth and they kneel. Other people there's all these levels of...
those I don't know.
Yeah. There's all these levels of, I guess... more or less fundamentalist.
Yes, well, the thing is that Saint-Sulpice, which of course is in the Saint-Germain area and is a Baroque church, has a reputation for being a relatively traditionalist.
It's very traditional.
Church.
It's very traditional. And all the kids who attend public school in that part of Paris, they all go to Saint-Sulpice. And Saint-Sulpice is as big...
It's a posh neighborhood.
Yeah. Saint-Sulpice is as big in surface area as Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. It's very large.
Is it really?
It's just wider. It's not as long, but it's wider.
Okay, yeah.
And so the surface is the same. So I heard priests say we should I think Easter... celebrations tomorrow are going to be at Saint-Sulpice. So the bishop,
right?
I think, I'm not sure. To me, he should go to Saint-Denis, but I don't know if he will. I'll read the news tomorrow. Figure it out.
Yeah. Well, of course, the reality is that everyone here, really everyone, including the most cynical people I know, like someone at my house, how we're really, really touched, really touched by this event, and really are waiting to see what they decide as the new design and how it will progress.
Yeah.
You know?
So on Monday, my whole family is coming over for a giant omelette, and because it's a holiday in France, the Monday after Easter is a holiday.
It's always Monday, not Sunday, because in the States it's just Sunday, right?
Right. In the U.S., it's just Sunday.
Just Sunday.
In France, it's it's
Easter Monday.
Well, because if you know how to count, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's Monday. The resurrection's Monday. Oh, and I heard the cutest thing. So in France, the bells don't toll between Good Friday and Monday morning. Because of the crucifixion, everybody's very sad, whatever. But then the bells toll in Rome again, and they fly all the way with the chocolates. The chocolate bells fly all the way to France, and all the children get their chocolate bell.
Oh, because they flew from Rome.
They flew from Rome.
My goodness
That's
gracious.
how we get our chocolate bells. We also get rabbits.
Must have been a drone.
Yeah, we also get rabbits.
We get rabbits.
And fish, little chocolate fish.
Well, because the fish is, of course, the symbol of Christ.
Right.
And of course,
And eggs.
in the States,
eggs.
you have eggs and you have rabbits. We do have rabbits. You know. And a lot of real hard-boiled eggs that are decorated.
That's true. We used to do that at my mother-in-law's house. I don't.
I mean, this is getting off a little bit because it is the weekend of
it's
Easter.
just Easter, yeah.
But chocolate makers really like Christmas and they really love Easter.
Yes. I have my stash of Easter stuff behind you.
Uh-oh, watch out. My arm is very long, Annie. Anyway, so this is our little podcast in honor of
Notre Dame. I will miss it. I look forward to it coming back. I look forward to being able to taking people back to see this magnificent facade. To me, when they open the facade, I'll be very happy because that's where I get the most joy out of taking people because it speaks to me. It's got lots of stories.
Lots of stories.
Mm-hmm. Merci, Elise.
Thank you yourself, Annie.
Au revoir. We'll talk to you next Sunday.
See you soon. Hear you from us soon.
Bye. After the regular closing music for the show, I will play a recording that I made at Notre Dame just this last time I was there. When I'm in Paris, I go inside of Notre Dame quite a bit. And that day, there was a wedding on. And I just happened to walk in when the happy couple was exiting the church. Oh, my God. They looked like they were 15. It was unbelievable. Anyway, so I recorded the wedding march. And it's not a very good recording. It's not a professional recording. I was just holding my recorder in my hand. But you hear the power of the organ and of the I mean, I can still feel the vibration in the room, and the organ and the bells. They'll come back. Thank you, Sylvia, Tracy Miller, Brad, Shelley Potsnack, Bronskbeat, Shelley Posnack, and Robin Noel for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. And my thanks also to all the other patrons who support the show month after month. Thank you so much for giving back. A new Lunch Break French Patreon reward will come out in the next few days about the intruder at the Pantheon in Paris. And that's in French and English, so you can practice your French comprehension. And thank you also Rebecca Ramirez and Itomi Oshita for your one-time donation done through the Tip Your Guide button on joinusinfrance.com. I spent a wonderful week in Nice. What a gorgeous city. I learned a lot about the history of the city and look forward to sharing all of that with you at some later date. I've been deleting some comments and posts that I don't agree with from the Facebook group. Let me tell you in the podcast some of the things I delete, just so you know. I've posted it on the Facebook group, but I want everybody to hear it. Number one is articles that are 100% fear-mongering, and there are a lot of them out there. Websites want clicks. They will write the most outrageous stuff just to scare you and get you to click. I have zero tolerance for that. I live in France. I read French news every day. If I know for a fact that something is either totally false or very, very exaggerated, I will kill it. Links to articles from websites that I don't know and authors I don't trust. I don't have time to read and vet every article you think should be shared. And there are too many people in the group for me to do that. So if you share a link and it's not from a reputable news source, I will probably kill it. I would like you to restrict yourself to only talk about tour companies that you've used personally. Number 4, if you want me to talk about your website, your book, your tours, come on the podcast and then we'll talk. Until then, I will delete. Also, let me touch on the difference between the Join Us in France Facebook page and the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook. I post the episodes to the Facebook page where you can tag people, share the post. You can also comment, of course. But if you have questions, ask them on the closed group because there are a lot more activity there. Keep in mind that what gets posted to the group cannot be shared because it's a closed group. That's by definition. So if you want to tag someone who is not a member of the group, go to the page instead of the group. As you know, because you're listening to me right now, you can hear Join Us in France anywhere you get your podcasts. But if you want to help other people listen to the show, tell them that they can listen on Pandora, Spotify, Alexa, Google Home, YouTube, and on joinusinfrance.com as well. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Have a great week of trip planning or a great week in France, and I'll talk to you next week. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2019 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.